Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance.
So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him."
So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first.
He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in.
Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen.
Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead.
Then the disciples went back to where they were staying.
Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying, and as she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot.
They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?"
"They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him."
At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?"
Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him."
Jesus said to her, "Mary."
She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher.
Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God."
Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her.
The first people who were witnesses to the resurrection were the ones who went to the tomb. The first people who became aware that hope and resurrection were possible were the ones who showed up to death. The first people who met Christ's resurrected body were the ones who went to take care of his dead body. It can be so tempting, especially on Easter, but in general, to move quickly through the sad parts, to fast forward through the last year, and to arrive at the alleluias and the hugs and the next things, the restaurants, the festivals, the weddings, all the things that we hope are coming, the hugs, the human contact, to skip where we've been in favor of where we're going. But even though signs of new life are coming, even though a significant chunk of us are vaccinated already, even though things are shifting, we don't know what it's going to be like yet. To find out what it's going to be like, we have to start where we are. And that means starting here in a cemetery. The losses of the last year have been unfathomable. The losses of the last year we could never count. From the many hundreds of thousands just in our own country who have died of COVID-19, plus so many more around the world, to the people lost senselessly to systemic racism and police violence, from wildfires to floods, orange days, to rain, to drought. Who knows the pain that this community has suffered in the last year? In the fall, Reverend Molly said, We as a community have been both privileged and fortunate to not lose anyone, any members to COVID-19, but Bruce Stangelin reminded us that that's not quite true. That the amount of isolation that COVID-19 caused brought Susan to the last days of her life. That all of our rituals and all of our ways of being together and offering solace to each other have been disrupted. People have died without even a hand on their shoulder or a kiss on their brow. And here we are at the end of it. Here we are, wondering what comes next. Here we are, reckoning with death. We show up where we are. We call the names out. George Floyd and so many others who've been killed. And we say, we are ready. We show up to do the task of grieving and mourning together so that we can make space for what comes next.
So what is next? Well, we don't really know yet. Not fully. We're somewhere in the middle of the story still. Somewhere between the empty cross, that crossroads, and the empty tomb. Still somewhere on the path out. My toddler has taken to saying recently, when COVID's all done, like it's the promised land. Oh, when COVID's all done, we can see grandma and grandpa again. Or when COVID's all done, we can take off our masks at the playground. Or sometimes when she gets a no from us, she'll say, but maybe when COVID's all done. Her hope keeps me going and breaks my heart a little to think that maybe on some level we may never be all done. And I don't mean just with this mutating virus, of course, but with all the death-dealing forces that continue to haunt us and mutate in our society, in our world. Systemic racism and its many strains and interlocking oppressions, hate crimes, and the ongoing drone of horrific gun violence, poverty, addiction, toxic theologies that turn people in on themselves and against one another, the crucifixion of our one beautiful blue planet, and on and on. When, O Lord, will we be all done with all of these death-dealing forces? And it's easy to get stuck there, right? Like stuck in the cemetery, weeping like Mary Magdalene, stuck in despair. We can feel like the massive cargo ship stuck in the Suez Canal this past week. I mean, can we as humans ever be fully inoculated against the diseases of hatred, violence, greed, oppression? Can we imagine what it would be like to truly fear no evil, to truly trust that God is with us, that love could really win and live as if it were true? I don't know. On this side of death, anyway, we are very much still in the muddled middle, on the path out. But the story of Easter, it's a spoiler of how this all ends, and not even just how it ends, because it preaches a truth beyond linear time. It is the promise of Easter is resurrection is both our goal and our gift, that ultimately in God's time, outside of time, through Jesus, who is himself the way, death is finished. There at the crossroads of the cross, all death-dealing forces are declared all done. All that separates and destroys is already all done in the crucified and resurrecting heart of God. And so, we are still in the middle of our story, all our stories, not just where the pandemic is concerned, but all the challenges and joys we carry. But we're in a different middle moment, right, than we were a year ago. We've all changed. Sometimes it feels like time was paused on the cusp of last spring, but it didn't. It kept on ticking. A couple weeks ago, when many of us gathered on the front lawn at church for our Palm Sunday parade, you could see the time pass crystallized in the children and teens with the fresh inches and new maturities. And I overheard people saying to one another, "Ah, it's you. I didn't recognize you at first." Of course, we all had our masks on, but also we're all different than we were a year ago. And that first Easter morning, friends, Mary Magdalene didn't recognize Jesus either right away. It's hard to recognize one another on the other side of resurrection. Mary Magdalene had come to keep watch at death's door. That devoted frontline nurse to Jesus' ministry, she got the first glimpse of the risen Christ, a perfectly just rollout in access to new life, if you ask me. But even though she saw him at first, she didn't see him. Through her tears, through her fears, in the darkness before dawn, her grief eclipses her imagination, and she assumes he's the gardener. Which he kind of is. I mean, on one level, right? He's cultivating a different kind of growth. And that is resurrection, new life growing up out of the ashes of death. We started in a graveyard and it's become a garden. Mary Magdalene has been reckoning with death, but now she must reckon with life. There, in the middle of the reckoning, comes the recognition, dawning slowly, and then all at once. The bubble of her sorrow pops. Teacher, it's you.
The person she loved most in the world was not dead, but alive. Mary Magdalene did what any sane person would do. She rushed to grab him and never let go. But Jesus said to her, "Noli me tangere," hands off, don't touch me. How could he? The words sound harsh to our ears because we don't know what he meant by them, saying them as he did to someone he loved right back. Those 3 words, "Don't touch me," have a new resonance this year. This year has cruelly prevented us from embracing our own beloveds. The magic of technology brings us together, yet dissolves us in pixelation and internet fails. We fog up the plexiglass, imprisoning our person. The specter of a virus that is not even itself a living thing somehow carries the power to snuff out the sturdiest life within its RNA. We imagine it floating on every wind that comes our way. Death has literally been in the air non-stop this year and has made us both scared to touch and scared not to touch. Every cell of our bodies is aware of our crying need for embrace and of the danger inherent still in being too close. We thrilled when the checkout clerk accidentally brushed our hand, giving us the change. Or we shivered when someone walked past us on the sidewalk, unmasked. We did what we were supposed to do. We formed bubbles, we cut ourselves off from human contact outside those bubbles, we cocooned, and we turned into mush. But no bubble can last forever. Bubbles are by nature temporary, transitional, and fragile. And now we find that everywhere the bubbles are beginning to pop. After so much time living inside of them, this is liberating, but it's also terrifying, let's admit it. We might find that we have not FOMO, but FOGO, fear of going out. Our cocoons have gotten comfortable. But if we stay there, we will die there. Those safe havens will become our tombs. how do we live again, truly? How do we trust life when we know that death is still out there waiting for us, rubbing its greedy hands together? When simply because of the color of our skin, or our gender, or our country of origin, it might be even greedier for us because of the virus of hatred that has been thawed and unleashed upon the world as well. At Easter, we celebrate the victory of life over death, but what they don't tell us is that even after you've come back from the dead, they can still kill you all over again. Just ask Lazarus. And even tougher, there are things that won't kill us, but they will make us scared, sad, grief-stricken, heartbroken, or incandescent with rage. This past year has been full of such ghouls. The only sure thing is death, and the quiet that comes when it is our turn to surrender to it. But life is a completely different story. Life is a beast. It is full of uncertainty and drama, wins and losses, emotional demands, and painful new learnings. And worst of all, iPhone updates that ruin everything. After trauma and tragedy, life goes on. And eventually equilibrium may be restored. Healing may happen. We may even find an even keel. But the thrum of our hearts reminds us that if we are lucky, we will live long enough for life to get hard again. While we are getting a reprieve right now with max vaccinations just to my right at Albany Bulb, and sanity somewhat restored to our national leadership, we know in our hearts that these pandemics are not over. Life has tides and cycles between good news and bad news, between death and resurrection. So how do we live again? As much as we can after all we have been through. How do we trust life? How do we choose the biggest life imaginable and available to us at any given moment and not just play it safe? How do we embrace everything and everyone embraceable in the fullness of time? Beloved, I want you to think back on who you were a year ago. Whether you feel it or not in any given moment, you are not the same person. You are older, you are definitely wiser, and for sure less naive. You are probably kinder and more vulnerable, thank God. You are more patient. I know this because I am not aware of any recent homicides in the congregation. This doesn't mean you don't lose it from time to time, because you are still fully human. Perhaps more human than you have ever been. You move more slowly, and not just because you maybe gained weight. You move more slowly because you have gained gravity. And that is a blessing. You are clearer about what really matters, and you are meeting your people and your practices more mindfully. You let beauty stop you in your tracks more often. Some of the chaff of your life has blown away. Let it go. You notice the earth and its gifts more. Maybe because you know better now that from earth you came, and to earth you shall return. Just not yet. You have survived everything so far. More than you could ever have imagined. And God isn't done with you yet. What this year has shown us is that we can endure and survive and thrive. I take it back. What this year has shown us is what we can die to and be resurrected from. Because this year has brought 1 million deaths and more, and yet we emerge. Beloved, we are emerging from our cocoons, no longer goo, but fully formed, if fragile, wet, and weak. We are discovering our wings. We are learning how they work. We are finding the courage to use them. My mother-in-law, whom I secretly call my mother-in-love because she is one of the best people I know, has spent a significant amount of time this year getting her affairs in order. Fully vaccinated now, she visited us last week, and when we went to hug, she instinctively pulled away after the standard 3.2 seconds, but I held on. "I'm not done yet," I said to her, and she melted back into me, and we danced and danced and didn't let go. Beloved, just for today, ignore what Jesus said. Grasp him. Don't let him go until he says he will take you with him where he is going, up, up, and away. Hold on tight and rise with him above the smoke and the fog and the germs and the fray of life, just for today. We have been through a never-ending Lent and a long lament. We might find ourselves flattened by survivor's guilt or frightened into staying inside the tombs that kept us safe, but now threaten our lives. We can get up, we can get out, and we can dance with God. We're not done with bubbles. The time for them will come again. But for now, let them fly away. Or better yet, fly with them straight to the sun.